Welcome to the Flag Bearer channel. This is Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The tragic story of the Muse brothers, kidnapped into the circus. This is the tragic story of two young brothers who were kidnapped from a farm in the early 1900s and forced to be on display in traveling circuses. Two albino African-American men named George and Willie Muse became famous across the United States as Eko and Iko, the sheep-headed cannibals from Ecuador. But the Muse brothers weren't from Ecuador. Willie and George Muse were born with albinism into an African-American sharecropping family in Franklin County, Virginia. Their milky white skin, white hair, and blue eyes made them targets for sideshow promoters at the time when circuses were abundant and very lucrative. It was common for bounty hunters to look for new freak show performers. The circus was the most dominant form of entertainment between 1840 and 1940, and the sideshow was a big part of that. Snatched from their parents as children, they were displayed as Eko and Iko. In the tobacco farming town of Truvine, Virginia, George and Willie Muse were born into an impoverished sharecropping family. The brothers were born with albinism, a genetic disorder characterized by a lack of pigmentation, health issues, and pale eyes. Not only did they suffer from albinism, but George and Willie also had a condition that would slowly and gradually make them blind. Their pale skin was sensitive to sunlight and prevented them from spending too much time in the punishing Virginia sun, so they weren't very much help in the fields. There are two different stories as to how Willie and George landed in the circus. The first account goes that in 1899, a man in the circus industry had caught sight of the peculiar-looking boys and lured them away with candy into a wagon, kidnapping them. The man was known as James Candy Shelton. The story asserts that one day when the boys were out in the fields alone, Shelton lured them away from safety with candy. Instead of returning the Muse brothers home safely, it seems that Shelton simply drove off with them, effectively abducting the boys. Some accounts state that Harriet, their mother, allowed Shelton to promote her sons as an attraction while his circus was in town, and that she may have accepted payment. She may have let her sons go with the carnival because she could not see a future for them. With their albino skin, working in the hot sun was dangerous, and the family had little money to support them. Harriet Muse expected them to be returned home, but became increasingly worried as time passed without her sons coming home. Either story implies that George and Willie were kidnapped from their homes by Shelton. Willie and George were exhibited at the age of 10 and were told the traumatizing lie that their mother was dead. Throughout their circus careers, George and Willie were often billed as things they were not. They were marketed as aliens from Mars, sheep-headed cannibals, Ecuadorian white savages, cavemen, descendants of monkeys, and other degrading, ridiculous falsities. Given they had pale skin and coarse hair, their hair was often styled into dreadlocks that stood atop their head almost like they were sprouting. The Muse brothers had been forced to grow their hair into vast dreadlocks that they would tuck into enormous caps and then release before gawking white audiences. Dreadlocks were in those days an unusual sight, and white people would tug at them to see if they were real. The brothers were forced to work in ill conditions and were required to do degrading and humiliating tasks. The little pay they earned along the way was used for much-needed clothing. Circus goers would pay the equivalent of $30 in today's money to be photographed with Eko and Iko. For years after their abduction, Shelton acted as the brothers' manager as they toured the U.S. in a series of circuses, using the money they earned to pay for their board, lodging, and clothes, but never letting them have their wages. After traveling the local carnival circuit for years, they eventually became part of Ringling Brothers Circus, the country's largest circus. The brothers' albinism was also used as case studies for the United States eugenics movement. In 1939, George and Willie's photograph appeared in a textbook called You and Heredity, the picture supplied by the Ringling Circus publicity people. The purpose of publishing the picture in the book was to support the claim that sterilization and birth control might reduce the proportion of the unfit. In the 1920s, George and Willie's home state of Virginia was at the forefront of American eugenics. It introduced a program that between 1924 and 1979 forcibly sterilized 8,000 people on the grounds of mental illness, physical deformity, or even homelessness in the name of protecting the purity of the American race. It is claimed that this program provided the inspiration for Hitler's sterilization experiment in Germany. The Ringling Brothers Circus was one of the most successful at the time and had traveled to the Muses' hometown of Roanoke, Virginia in 1927. Harriet Muse was working as a maid and a laundress in Roanoke, and though illiterate, had found out her sons were coming to town. Harriet asserted it came to her in a dream that her boys would be there that day, and she ventured out to claim her children. Harriet went into the sideshow tent, made her way to the front of the crowd. George elbowed Willie and said, "There's our mother. She's not dead." And her sons, leaving their instruments, went to be reunited with her instantly. Finally, their beliefs had been confirmed that their mother was not dead. Ringling's lawyers immediately swarmed the reunion, as well as law enforcement, but Harriet somehow was able to convince them that the brothers were indeed her sons. The boys returned with their mother to their quaint, tiny shanty. Certainly the boys had been trafficked for at least 13 years when they were reunited with their mother. After reuniting with her sons, Harriet wanted payback. Harriet was an extraordinary woman. 3 days after she faced down the circus proprietors and the city cops in that sideshow tent and reclaimed her sons, she started legal proceedings against Ringling Brothers and Shelton. The brothers had been, her lawyer argued, held against their will and turned into slaves. In a settlement, the circus agreed to pay back wages. Later, the kidnapper-turned-manager Shelton was dispatched to sweeten the deal. Shelton offered that if the brothers returned to the circus, a portion of their salary would be paid to their parents. Their mother, Harriet, had fought a long battle to have them return and eventually was successful. Harriet took Ringling to court for back wages and won the settlement. The Eko and Iko Act had proven lucrative for years and had kept them working until the late 1950s, so they were owed a lot of back wages. The money was mostly spent by their stepfather, causing George and Willie to have to return to the circus nearly a year later. But this time, they returned on their own terms. The Muse brothers were blessed with an innate musical ability and were able to play any song after listening to it just once. Now, they were able to receive compensation and sent much-needed support to their family. Harriet repeatedly used the law to ensure that her sons got paid, that the circuses they worked for informed her of their whereabouts, and that some of their earnings came to her. She used the money she saved to buy land in Franklin County, Virginia, where she hoped she would see her boys later live. That was not to be. She died at age 68 in 1942. During the Muse brothers' career, they met the Queen of Buckingham Palace and headlined at Madison Square Garden. By middle age, due to their eye complications, both were blind. After their mother died, the money that she had saved for them allowed them to retire and purchase a home that their family still owns today. Their caretaker was their great-niece, Nancy Saunders. The story became a legend as the brothers aged and came under the care of Saunders. Willie died first in 1971, and George lived to be a staggering 108 years old, dying in 2001. Even through the tragedies of their lives, they always had each other. Until next time, if you like little-known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.